Hey guys, Hedar Plays here. Have you ever noticed that every fossil Pokemon prior to Gen 8 is Rock type? This makes sense since they're based on fossils, which are pieces of organic matter turned into rock over thousands of years. But does that mean that every prehistoric Pokemon was Rock type? Maybe not. Some people have theorized that the fact that all these Pokemon have Rock type might just be a side effect of being revived from a fossil, where the Pokemon had a different type originally, but that type became Rock type after it got revived from a fossil. This means that a lot of these Pokemon might have had different types originally. But what were those types? That's what this video plans to explain. I'll be using a mixture of the Pokédex entries, move pool, Pokemon's design, Pokemon's logic, and a bit of real-world biology and paleontology in order to figure out what types these Pokemon were originally before they got revived. Okay, let's start off with Generation 1. Generation 1 introduced 3 lines of fossil Pokemon: Aerodactyl, Kabuto and Kabutops, and Armonite and Armstar. Okay, let's start off with Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl seems to be based on some sort of pterosaur, winged reptiles that are closely related to dinosaurs. Even its name is a combination of aerial and pterodactyl, pterodactyl being a non-scientific name for pterosaurs. And fun fact, there was actually, believe it or not, a real life pterosaur named after Aerodactyl called the Aerodactylus. Aerodactyl seems to be based on a Pteranodon, the most famous tyrannosaur that most people think of when they think pterodactyl. It seems to have the head of a Dimorphodon, though, and to me this seems like a dragon type. More evidence for this is the fact that in every single game he's appeared in, Lance has used an Aerodactyl. And yes, I know in the other games he had to use non-dragon type Pokemon because there was only one dragon type line, like when he uses the Charizard and Gyarados, but I still think that's pretty good evidence. Next up, let's talk about Kabuto. Kabuto is based on a horseshoe crab with some elements of a trilobite, a prehistoric arthropod that lived all throughout the Paleozoic era. Nerd! Kabutops is based on a Eurypterid, a prehistoric sea scorpion that lived from the Ordovician, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, to the Permian period. Eurypterids are not poisonous, so that excludes poison, so the most likely possible typing for them is bug. I mean, you could have probably figured it out without me telling you about all these inspirations, but I love paleological zoology, and where else can I really talk about this? Next up are Armonite and Armstar. Now these are a bit tricky. They're based on Armonoida, prehistoric cephalopods that lived during the Mesozoic era. And many people who do this type of video make the mistake of making them bug type. But that would be wrong because they're cephalopods, not mollusks or arthropods, which are normally what types would get of animals would get the bug type. So if you want to make them bug type, you'd probably have to make Pokemon like Malamar and Artillery bug type, and no one in their right mind would think that. So we have to look for some other option. First off, I was thinking rock type. Maybe they were always rock type because of their rock hard shell. Not all Pokemon that are rock type are literally made of rock. There's kind of like Rhyperior and Rhydon that are just rock-like or as hard as rock. So it's possible that they're rock type, so it's either pure water or rock type is my final decision on this. The next fossil Pokemon that I will introduce will be Anareth and Armonite and Credelian Lilipline, since I guess Gen 2 was just too cool for fossils. Now these were a little tricky, but I think I've found pretty good types for them. Okay, first off are Credelian and Lily. These Pokemon are based on plant-like marine animals, so water type is an obvious choice. However, several Pokédex entries for Credelian mention that it is poisonous, so poison also works. However, I'm going with water because it seems to be more defining of what Credelian is and where it lives, and a ton of Pokemon are poisonous or venomous and not poison type. I mean, a ton of Pokemon can learn Poison Powder, and literally every Pokemon can learn Toxic. So I'm going to go with water. So although it should be water poison because it's technically not a plant, but it's already a grass type, so water, grass it is. Okay, next up are Anareth and Armonite. They are classified as the old shrimp Pokemon and are based on Anareth, a shrimp-like arthropod that lived in the Cambrian period. And most depictions of them show them underwater. So I'm going to say bug water is the best fit. Now some might say that steel type is better for it due to the fact that it has a hard shell, but plenty of Pokemon have hard shells and aren't steel types, so Bugwater is the best fit in my opinion. Okay, next up we move on to Gen 4 with Cranidos and Rampardos and Shieldon and Bastiodon. Now these things get a bit tricky here because Cranidos and Rampardos are both pure rock types. Now this leads me to believe that both of their types were removed when they were revived, and their original type was Bug Fire. Okay, I'm obviously kidding. No, they were probably pure rock type to begin with. Now let's move on to Shieldon and Bastiodon. Now, at first I was thinking Steel Rock, but after I thought about it more, Ground seems to be the better fit for them. Now let's move on to Gen 5. Moving on to Gen 5, you have Arcan and Archeops and Tortuga and Karacosta. Arcan and Archeops are based on the Archaeopteryx, the first ever bird, with some elements of Dromaeosaur in there, so it's a killer bird. So, maybe it could be monotype. Don't be ridiculous. Game Freak is obviously afraid of mono-flying types. So let's look back and see what Archeops is. It's a bird, so it's obviously a normal type. 90% of bird Pokemon are normal types, so it's a normal type. Making it the first regional bird. Moving on to Tortuga and Karacosta, a lot of people like to think dark type, but there's nothing malicious or like bad about them. Sure, they do look a bit ominous and they have dark ones, but dark isn't like literal dark or even just ominous. It's evil. Or like bad, because that's what it is in Japanese. It's evil type in Japan. I think it's always been a rock type because its shell is super hard and it even looks like a rock type in my opinion. I think its shell kind of looks rocky to me. Moving on to Gen 6, we have Tyrant, Tyrantium, Amora, and Aurorus. Now, Amora and Aurorus are based on sauropods, but that doesn't really help us that much. I mean, what type would a sauropod be? Even though this inspiration doesn't really help us find its original type, the second inspiration of it, the Aurora Borealis, might be able to help us. Now, the Borealis is heavily associated with magic and has much folklore about it, and it's also known as the Northern Lights and glows and has light. This all leads me to think that Amora and Aurorus might be fairy types because of the mysticism around the Aurora Borealis. I mean, after all, fairy is just a standard magic type, and because of the light that it produces that is known as the Northern Lights, and fairy is also our standard light type. Next up are Tyrant and Tyrantium, who are based on the Tyrannosaurus, with some elements of the Carnosaurus and Allosaurus thrown in there for good measure. So it makes sense for it to be mono dragon type, but Dragon Dark would also fit since it's highly aggressive and also gives it a stab for crunch and bite. Now I understand that giving it Dark type would give it the worst possible matchup against the Aurorus, but that kind of makes sense since sauropods are some of the only dinosaurs that not even the biggest predators could mess with. Moving on to Gen 8, things get complicated. Now, Sword and Shield did something a bit different where they gave us hybrids. Now, at first I hated these Pokemon. They were ugly, and I'm like, what is this, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or what is this, Digimon? But after realizing the origins of these Pokemon, I now love them. These Pokemon are a reference to how original paleontology from the 1800s was very inaccurate. Paleontologists mistake different developmental stages of species for different species, mixed up the bones of different species, and even assembled them wrong, much like the fossils in Gen 8. My favorite example of this in real life is the Brontosaurus, which is actually a Camarasaurus head with an Apatosaurus body, which is basically the same thing as me photoshopping the head of a lion onto the body of a bear, and bam, new animal. So now that we have these weird hybrid things, I think the best thing to do is take these Frankenstein dinosaurs and split them into their original fossils and then try to figure out those Pokemon's typing. Okay, first off we have the bird fossil Zolt. Now this Pokemon is based on Dromaeosaurus, the family of dinosaurs that contain Deinonychus, Dromaeosaurus, super creative name there, Velociraptor, Utahraptor, Microraptor, and pretty much any dinosaur with the word raptor in its name with the exception of Oviraptor, Megaraptor, and Earaptor. Considering the wing-like arms and its small size, I'm presuming that it most closely resembles a Microraptor. The Microraptor is pretty similar to birds and is actually pretty closely related to birds. It has the ability to glide, and because of this and the fact that it comes from the bird fossil, I'm assuming flying type. Next up we have the fish fossil, Vish. Now this is based on the Dunkleosteus, however you pronounce that, which is a prehistoric fish from the late Devonian period. These fish had armored heads, and instead of teeth, they had two pairs of razor-sharp plates made of bone that formed a beak-like structure. Considering this, I can see this being one of the bulkier types of rock or steel. And I'm looking at it and I'm going for steel. Next up we have the dino fossil Aerodactyl. Now I've seen a bit of a debate on what this Pokemon actually is. Some say it's a plesiosaur, a long-necked marine reptile that is what the Loch Ness Monster is rumored to be, and others say it's a mosasaur, which is a marine lizard. Now, what it actually is doesn't really matter for this. I mean, I personally like to think it's a plesiosaur because of the Loch Ness Monster and England, but it doesn't matter since they're both marine animals, so water ice type is the final type. Finally, we have the Drake fossil. Now, I've seen a little bit of a debate over what this Pokemon originally was. Some people say it's some sort of Stegosaurus, and other people say it's some sort of Pachyrhinosaurus, specifically the Dracorex Hogwartus. Yes, I am not making that up, that is its real name. I'm leaning more towards Stegosaurus due to the fact that the plates seen on the Drake fossil's back aren't really seen in Pachyrhinosaurus and were a defining characteristic of Stegosaurus. But now we are into a problem. Stegosaurus is an entire suborder and has a lot of different genuses in it. And although all those different genuses might look similar and have a lot of similar characteristics like back spikes and plates, they all have very different functions and also very different purposes, and each of these different genuses behave and act very differently in very different anatomies. So we're going to have to nail this down. If you look at the two Pokemon the Drake fossil can be revived into, we notice two important details. One is that there is no tail spike, and secondly, that the plates are almost spike or blade-like. Now this is an important detail because although all of the Stegosaurus had back plates, they all serve very different functions. Some were for defense, others were for intimidation, others were for communication, and others were for intimidation. And because of their shape and structure, I feel like they will most likely be defense. So this helps us narrow down the possible type of Stegosaurus that it is into a few different categories. Unfortunately, this eliminates the most beloved Stegosaurus of all time, the Stegosaurus. So, looking at what we have left, it doesn't exactly matter what family it is. It's a Credelian if you want to know, but regardless, the remaining Stegosaurids, or Stegosauria, however you pronounce whatever the plural is, I don't grammar good. Anyway, they all have solid spikes and solid plates that are made for defense, and they are all solid and thick, which makes me think rock, so I am leaning towards rock for this Pokemon. So guys, those are my thoughts on the original typings of each fossil Pokemon. Do you agree with me? Do you have any other ideas? Tell me down below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, all the other stuff. There's honestly so much stuff to do now that I can't even remember all the stuff to tell you to do. But do all this stuff, you know what I'm talking about, and do it on my old channel too. And just do it on everything, basically. There's so much stuff now I don't even know what to say anymore.